What is up, guys? What is up, guys? Welcome to another incredible episode of Vigilantes Radio Live right here on iHeartRadio. And I am your host, Deanie. We have a very special guest for you guys, so you could definitely want to stick around for that. And as a matter of fact, you could text your buddies, your family members, or even share it on social media right now and let them know that we have another episode just for them. And for you guys who subscribe to the show, you'll be the first to know when this episode airs. And I always appreciate that. Before I invite my guest on, I do want to say, this is the frequency of the fearless. Some people spend their entire lives hiding the broken pieces, trying to cover them, trying to explain them away, trying to convince themselves that what happened didn't leave a mark. But the truth is, every life is a mosaic, a collection of moments, choices, wounds, victories, losses, and lessons that somehow come together to tell a story. The question isn't whether you've been broken. The question is what we choose to build from the pieces. And tonight's conversation explores trauma, healing, forgiveness, faith, and the courage it takes to stop surviving long enough to start living. You're not just here for a talk show, and this isn't just radio. This is revival for your mind, body, and spirit. This is Vigilantes Radio Live right here on iHeartRadio. And my name is Coach Deanie. And I just want to let you know change is possible. I hope you're ready. All right, guys, our special guest tonight goes by the name of Jocelyn Toppin. She is an author, survivor, entrepreneur, mentor, and woman of faith whose life journey has been marked by both profound hardship and remarkable healing. Through her memoir, Grit to Grace, My Mosaic Life, she shares a deeply personal story of overcoming childhood trauma, emotional abandonment, and years of eternal struggles while discovering the power of faith, forgiveness, and self-worth. Today, she uses her voice to encourage others to reclaim their lives, break generational cycles, and find beauty in the pieces they once believed were beyond repair. That is right. Her name is Jocelyn Toppin, and tonight we'll be diving deep into her book and her life. Without any further ado, let's invite Jocelyn to the show.
Thank you.
Hey. How's it going? How's it going?
It's going good. It's going great. Thanks for
All right.
having me on your show. This is an awesome experience. I hope some people gain some insight that can help them.
Absolutely. And I truly hope so as well. When you look back on your life today, what part of your story took the longest to make peace with?
Whew. To be really honest, the hardest piece was the forgiveness and just letting go of, all of the things that come around that, the anger, the questions that aren't answered, and just not really understanding, the why was kind of the hardest for me. But when I finally got to a point where I just realized it's not mine to carry, and it was so heavy, and it just caused a lot of areas of my life that just kept me bound. And when I finally gave into and said, you know what, I'm done, and I want to be free. Not only did I free myself, but I freed a man that was in prison. I didn't free him physically, but I freed him spiritually.
Yeah. I think that is the deeper part. Forgiveness is not just for the person, about a person. Sometimes it's more so about us and what we are releasing from our hearts. I just had a moment last year around the same time where I did not want to forgive. I wanted revenge, Jocelyn.
Yes.
I even, prayed to God. It's like, smite them,
Yes.
calling out fire from heaven. But ultimately, I know that is not the way that God operates. Um, and sometimes you have to go through things to condition your heart for other parts of your life that you're needed for. And it sucks as a human to have that experience, but you know, our journey is our journey. Uh, what made it difficult for you to issue forgiveness?
Well, first I didn't really know my background, my biological parents. Didn't really know too much of any of it, and I went on a search to find answers. And I had asked God. I said, "I'm ready, to face this full on, and kind of get a closed chapter. I wanted closure, and by doing so, I was able to locate them. Being adopted, they closed my book, which means basically my files were locked. And unless I was able to find them, they would have had to reach out, which they did not. So I went into, the DNA, like I'm not the DNA, but the where you're looking for your ancestry searches and things of that sort, and started down that road. um, and that became very interesting. My birth mom was married like 13 times within a 20-year span. And I found some old relationships. We'll just say the conversations didn't go well. So then that led me with like, do I really want to go down this road? Am I really prepared for, you know, the truth, the heartaches, the pain again? Um, but I knew that that was what I wanted, and I've always wanted that. And you always in your mind, being adopted, you always kind of vision like, oh, your parents got it together, and life's a lot different, and it's going to be like this fairy tale ending. And for some, it is, but not for everybody. And you're not really ever prepared for that. So once I kind of got to that, it took a lot of, you know, just putting the pieces together and trying to make sense of, stories, or, who was who, and, what really happened. And I got to a level that I may not ever have gotten those answers. And still to this day, I didn't really get fully all the answers that I was looking for. But I just knew one thing. God states in the word that, he cannot forgive us unless we can forgive those that, trespass against us. And, you know, that's where I was at. I was like, okay, you know, I have faith. I believe in God. You know, I do all these things in my life, but I'm harboring such a deep, weight, and I'm carrying it. And it wasn't my weight to carry. And even, if it was my weight, scripture says, lay your heavy burdens down. We're to lay them at the foot of the cross, and we're not to pick them back up, you know, and we're to like release them and let them go. And I tell you, the moment that, and I remember it like it was yesterday, I was sitting in my living room, and I was just talking to God, and I said, okay, God, I'm ready. I'm ready to write, this man in prison that I don't really know anything about. But I do know one thing. I'm ready to let go, and I'm ready to forgive, and I'm ready to move forward. And, it's this, it's like you think about it, it's three simple words: I forgive you. And those three simple words sometimes are the hardest things to say, you know? And it's kind of like we wrestle with that a lot of times. We always get in our minds, like, oh, yeah, God, just, get them back, give them back what they gave us, or, what they did to us. But you're right. That's not how God operates. And, he operates in love and grace and, forgiveness. And when I wrote those words, I won't be able to really describe the feeling exactly, but I'm going to do the best I can. As soon as I wrote those words, it was like this, like an ocean with wind, just so peaceful. And it just kind of floated down from my head and just across my shoulders. And the weight that just was so heavy was so gone. And I felt so light and I felt so airy, So that was kind of the beginning to my healing.
I love that. I love that. You mentioned that God's word says about if you want forgiveness, you know He's forgiven us, and we have to mimic that same gesture to strangers, to people we know, family members. And that was the thing that made me really change my heart. That and the parable about forgiving the debts. And it was like
Yes.
right around the time where I was holding on to resentment, holding on to this anger. Like I wanted justice in my own way, and God has His time in us. And I was like, okay, 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 I hear you, I hear you, I hear you. And a lot of people like, I wish God would speak to me. Read the Bible. Just
Definitely.
read the Bible. He will speak to you. Or listen to someone who knows the scriptures and can explain it in a way that will tug on your heart. But He does speak. His word is a living word. Jocelyn, I have a wife who was adopted, who went through the system, and I'm just a person who naturally asks questions, trying to understand what that's like. I grew up with two parents; she didn't, so we have that dynamic. Let's start with your story. How does your story start?
My story started at the age of 2, and I was sexually abused as a child. Um, when I didn't know the full story till later, but um, I guess my biological dad had taken me to to the emergency room, and lots of stories were told, but the doctors quickly figured out that you know the abuse had happened. They said that I was really malnourished. I was very delayed in my speech and other areas, and then I was placed in foster care um, by wonderful foster care parents who I was actually able to locate her and had a really great conversation with her. There was about 13 girls in the home that I shared with, and I was the youngest. So I think, being the youngest and getting a lot of attention at that time was really kind of like part of my turning point, um, and really kind of helped me for my next, step in my journey, which was adoption. And, I know a lot of people don't get like really good um, outcomes in foster care, and it can really kind of worsen a situation for a child than to better the situation. And I was just fortunate enough to have one that was just in a home that was really loving and nurturing. And I really like, I did, as a child I didn't really understand it. I wasn't like as grateful as I am looking back at it now. But I'm very grateful, and I know what my statistics would have been had I been had to stay in a home like such as that. The statistics are you either end up in prison because you end up, in the wrong crowd, the wrong people. Um, you find people that don't judge you, so you get stuck there. And those, a lot of those people aren't really going anywhere in their own lives, and a lot of them have their own brokenness. And then everybody's trying to help each other, and then it just doesn't work out. And or you end up with drugs and you go down a long life of that, or you end up dead, either, by suicidal, or by just, being on drugs, or, things of that nature. So I look back at it, and I'm really blessed. I was adopted by Christian a family, and my dad, who adopted, my mom and my dad who adopted me, um, they're my family. They're my parents, and that's how I look at it. And they've both passed away. My dad died the day before my 21st birthday, which was very hard on me. And I think about 10 years later, my mom died of Alzheimer's. And that was very challenging. But my dad was a pastor. So, my very first verse, and, a lot of people learn this as one of their very first verses, was John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever should love him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And, I think that's really just been something that's just really stuck with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a blessing to be, adopted by a Christian family. I can relate to that. I'm a PK kid myself. My dad was is an evangelist. He's a pastor now. But let me tell you, Jocelyn, the statement about preacher's kids, I live that statement.
Yes, I live that to its truth, to its fullest.
Yeah, to its fullest.
Yes.
But I know people like, yeah, I knew it. Preacher's kids are the worst. But I will say too that there is a proverb about training the child in the way that they should go, because when they get old, they will not depart from it. And as I got older, Jesus left the 99 for the one, came back, and now I'm back in the fold. And,
That is
and I,
correct.
yes, and I think according to our journeys, Jocelyn, that it was probably meant to be that way, because we can understand different sides of life and not just the bubble world that, some PK kids live in, some Christian kids live in. They don't get to see the world at its ugliest.
Yes.
And when you live a life of sin, you kind of witness that and be a part of that. So, um, yeah. Which part of your mosaic was the hardest to accept belong in your mosaic?
So the hardest part was, you know, when you have brokenness, and you kind of learn to, bury it, hide it, cover it up, and even though you kind of feel it, you don't let other people know that that's what you're really feeling.
Hmm.
So you kind of trick your mind into thinking that you've healed. Um, there's nothing wrong with you. You've gotten over it. You've moved on. But a lot of people don't really realize, and I didn't either, that when trauma happens, and it doesn't matter, if it's physical, mental, sexual, or just a traumatic experience, in a person's life, it hits us in our nervous system. So what happens is it hits your entire body, not just one particular area or another. So it's not like, oh, it's just your emotion that's affected, or it's just your mind or your mentality that's affected, or it's just your physical, or it's just your spiritual. It's all parts of those. And, the hardest part for me was that, when I kind of gotten to the point where I forgave, and, some other areas, started kind of moving along in my journey, I kind of thought, oh, I'm healed, I'm good.
Hmm.
Um, and I have 3 kids and 3 grandbabies. And, the hardest part was, um, even right when I was writing this book, the hardest part was realizing the weight that I carried, and the burden that I carried, and the things that I tried so hard to protect from my children. I didn't, and that was hard for me. That was hard for me to like realize that the pain that I try to keep from my children, I put onto them. Like my baggage, my suitcases, whatever you want to call it, um, they got dropped into theirs, and they started carrying those, you know, feelings, emotions, what have you. And they got hurt, in a lot of different areas. And for me, that was really hard for me. Um, and at first, it was kind of like I didn't want to like really 100% accept that because I was considered what you call a helicopter mom. Not proud of that. Um, but it is what it is. When you get hurt, you try your hardest to protect what you love the most. And sometimes by doing that, you don't see things that um they end up being vulnerable to, or situations that you end up even putting them in, not intentionally. You miss that, because you're so focused on one thing in one area that you kind of miss, some other things. And with that, it came a lot of that. And, I have great relationships with, all my children. And, yeah, there's still some difficult conversations, and, there's some still, hard areas to kind of talk through. But we're at a level now that, you know, we're able to kind of recognize, hey, okay, we've talked about this. Let's give it a rest, and let's take a break, or let's talk about something else, or let's just revisit this conversation like at another time. And it's kind of learning how to set the boundaries. And a lot of people, for myself, you know when you go through this, you become like an empath. So you want to help everybody, and you want to do whatever you can to help people. But the problem is a lot of times you end up getting hurt in that, and you don't realize that. And then when you do, when you're carrying that, you end up like hurting those that are around you as well, but you don't see it. And with that, that was the hardest for me, knowing that my brokenness was passed to my kids, and then my kids had their own brokenness, um, in them in different areas in their life. And I think for me though, um, the best part is, and because a lot of parents don't get that, they don't get that second, third, fourth, fifth chance to rebuild, or build a solid, good relationship with their children. And it's really sad. And really it's kind of just having ownership, just taking accountability, um and awareness of you know what really is going on, you know um and just letting your children, your kids know, like, hey, I know I can't say sorry enough, but you know I'm so, there's even times now, I catch myself in some of the old patterns, and I have to say, oh, I recognize that. Let me take a pause for a minute. This is how I used to respond, or this is how I used to do things. Let me take a step back and, choose the better path, and the right decision. And instead of just making a haste decision, I've learned to take a pause, and just try to take a breath and really just think about, what is it that I'm really trying to say? Or what is it that I'm really wanting to happen, in a situation? Or, where is it that I want to be in my spiritual, life? And so with that, you know, that's been a blessing. Just, writing this book, and there's even moments in this book that, you know, my daughter, well, not my just only my daughter, but my family has had, like, things that they've just kind of said to me. And I sat there and I was like, oh wow, that really makes sense. Let me write it, let me put that in the book. So it's been a journey, and it's not something that, people think, oh, you can just, get over, and move on with life. And, everybody has, problems in their life, and it's not a big deal. But trauma impacts people differently. And not everybody has the same exact blueprint. So it's not black and white. Um, so something that might be very traumatic to you, it may not impact me at all. And some people just don't understand that. They look at somebody else and they say, well, this happened to them and they don't do these things and they don't think this way and they don't, do all these things, but you do. So there's a problem with you. And then what that happens is it just causes a lower self-esteem. And then people they kind of quit. They quit before they even give themselves an opportunity to, like you said earlier, we have, generational, I call them generational curses. A lot of people call them bondage, things that have just been carried down and passed down generation to generation. And, I just wanted to break that cycle and, and to stop it so that it just doesn't keep going on down in my generation.
Yeah, generational habits and things that are passed down without even you knowing where they come from. That is a new term that I'm starting to learn about
Yes,
recently.
sir.
You know, especially when you're at a cookout and they say, "Hey, you're just like your Uncle Ron." Well, how was Uncle Ron?
Right?
What was he like? And they start telling you these stories. Like, I don't want to be like Uncle Ron. Um, wow, your story is I don't want to say a tragedy because you speak so beautifully about overcoming like the worst parts of life. And you've been helping other people get over it. I won't say get over it, go through it, go through
Yes.
it and understand maybe not even the why, but the how they are right in this moment. Um, Thinking back on your life and thinking about the book, you write openly about childhood neglect and abandonment. How does abandonment continue speaking to people long after childhood ends?
So, when you have abandonment issues, you always have this fear that, when somebody leaves, um, that, or, when you have relationships, and it doesn't matter what type of relationship it is, friend, boyfriend, husband, you know, even kids, whatever, when you get to a point to where people leave, um, you always kind of feel like everybody's going to do that to you, right? So your mindset's always kind of like in the back of your mind. Oh, I really want this relationship. And sometimes, like, you might work really hard to try to keep the connection. And then when it's broken, you just kind of find yourself like, oh, well, yep, there it is again. So you're always kind of looking for it. And what I kind of tell people is this, it's like this. God's gonna put people in your lives and they're gonna be there for like a season and they're gonna be there for a reason. And some of them are gonna be there for a lifetime and some of them are not. And like if you look back at like, even in your childhood, like your friends that you had in elementary, junior high, high school, and how you kind of changed friends and because you're trying to find yourself and who you really truly are. So you might be friends with people that play all the jocks and they play the sports, or you might be friends with like back in our day we had the preps and we had like all these different types of personalities, and you kind of start finding just kind of shifting through that. So if you look kind of back, some people, are lucky and they still have like their childhood friends, but a lot of people, like myself, because we moved, quite a bit, um, and like you look back and you don't have a lot of those friends, or you might not have any of those friends now, and so when you get into an adult and everybody's got busy lives, you start to try to, you want that closeness. You want that, that one friend at least, and a lot of people want many friends, and they feel like if they have like 20 friends, then everything's great. But, what I found is, like God's going to put you in like seasons where you're going to be completely 100% alone. Phone's not ringing, nobody's calling, nobody's checking on you. Nobody's really like even thinking about you, and you're gonna think, wow, yeah, and I did question God a lot, and even times now, He's put me in those seasons, and I'm like, the why, right? But here's the thing I found was because I used to be the why me, you know, and I turned it into why not me? Because if not me, then who? Right? Because there's going to always be a who. There's always going to be a person that God's going to use. And once I kind of was okay with being alone, and I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it's all the time that I'm that way, but once I can, have peace with that, when you really get good relationships, you're not looking for the abandonment, and you're not seeking out that abandonment anymore. You're seeking out like real relationships, like what's important to you in a relationship, what's important to you, with a friendship, you know, what is it that you're looking for, and a lot of people look for something to help them, but you know, it goes both ways. Like you could be a blessing to someone and not know it, but they could also be a blessing to you. And if you're looking for the abandonment portion of it, you're going to find it. Jesus said it in his word, if you seek, you will find, right? And it doesn't just mean like if you seek his word and him, you'll find the truth. It's like that in relationships too. Like if you're seeking, negative, you're going to find that. You're going to find that everywhere. You're going to find that in the churches. You're going to find that outside the churches. You're going to find that in your own homes. So if you seek for those things, you're going to always find those. And then you're going to always make those your beliefs. And when you make those your beliefs, that makes your actions. And that keeps you from, really having true deep relationships, not surface level. A lot of times these days people have, surface level relationships, and they're not deep, and you can't be vulnerable, because I've opened up when I forgave, I started opening up, and I thought, people would have compassion. They would have some understanding, maybe. You know, they would be a little bit more like comforting or, encouraging or something. But I didn't find that at first. And I was like, well, that's weird. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. But what I did find was the issue is it's not that they didn't have any of those things. They just didn't know what to do with it. And because they didn't know what to do with it, they didn't really say anything, or they distanced themselves. And it wasn't intentional. They just never dealt with anything like that. And it was heavy for them, and they didn't know how to carry it or what to do with it. So they tossed it away. And for somebody like me, it makes you think that something's wrong with you. You're broken, you're damaged, like you got all these pieces and you're just trying to put them back together and have what you see like other people have. And, but the beautiful part is, Mosaic it is broken pieces. And God in the Bible, look at all the people that he used that were broken, in different ways, and I mean, look at King David. He had everything, and then he chose wrong and created a great sin. And I mean, in today's world, it would be considered premeditated murder. But then look at him. He chased God with his own heart, and then God blessed him. And I mean, come on, let's look at Job. You want to talk about broken? Job had everything. Job had faith. He had courage. He never turned it away from God. And yet he had friends telling him, hey, Job, you must have really done something. You're not asking for forgiveness. You're not trying to do anything. And look at what God's doing. God's just putting his wrath on you. And, and in that time frame, that's what they believed. They believed that you must have really sinned against God for God to put the wrath down on you. But the real truth is, God knew how faithful Job was. And God knew the trials that he was going to face. But he also knew that that Job was going to stick through it all the way to the end. And, and he did. And look at the amazing thing that God did. God didn't only bless him with more. He bettered who Job was before going through that. His wife said, you surely should go out, curse God and die, just put yourself out of your own misery. But he didn't. He chose different, and we have those choices to, we can either carry the broken pieces and they can scatter here and, wherever, and we can drop them all over the place, or we can pick them up and we can ask God to put us back together and to put us into, how he sees us. He doesn't see us in our broken moments. He sees us as who he designed us to be, and we're beautiful to him. And, we kind of get caught in our own minds, and we get lost in our own problems or our brokenness. And, it just takes the faith of a mustard seed. If you know how tiny a mustard seed is, it's so small. Jesus sent the disciples out in a storm. Jesus wasn't in the boat at the moment, but Jesus knew they were going to go into the storm, So, sometimes we're sent into storms that, God knows where, that we're going to go through it and we're going to come out. And it's going to be better than what it was before we went through it. And, but Jesus was there, in the midst of it. And he spoke to it. He used the words, God, and he calmed the storm. And in our lives, we forget to do that. We forget to speak God's word, not only for ourselves, but for other people. And, it says that my word will not return void. For a long time, I didn't really understand that. I was like, God, I'm empty. Like, what do you mean your word won't return void? Where's it going? And what that actually means is if we read his word, we really try to understand it. And yeah, sometimes, because we don't speak, the way they spoke back then, and we've broken it down, and now we have a lot of slang, and we have a lot of, different meanings for the same words. It's very confusing, and it can be. But if you, ask God to say, hey, give me a little understanding, show me how to apply this in my own life, or, what am I supposed to do with this? But when we pray, this is how I tell people to remember. Praise God for all the things that he did, no matter how big or small they are. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if, you got the best coffee today, that you haven't had a good coffee in a while, it doesn't matter if it's just that little moments, that's all he's asking for. And then it's repent for, your sins and, the things that you might have planted seeds in your own lives, not knowing, and letting things come into your own lives that, have caused, some strife or some problems in your area, and, in your own, your own walk. And then it's, then it's asking, a lot of people have, they're like, I don't know what to say to God. I don't know how to pray. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. This is the time not only to ask for yourself, but you're supposed to ask for your others. I mean, if Jesus can sit down and break bread with a man that he knew was going to be his enemy and betray him, you know, then how hard is it for us to ask for those, that, are the same, in our own, in our own passing, or, that maybe we don't even know them. We just know that, they don't make right decisions and choices, and, we're supposed to pray for that and ask for that. And, and then the last thing is the most important thing to do that a lot of people forget to do. They think that, okay, I praised God. I repented. I read the Bible. I asked for, all these things, and I'm okay. And they go on about their lives. But the last word, the last letter to pray is why, and it's yield. And what that means is to sit there and to meditate on the word. And when you're praying, you want to pray that the scriptures back to God. He knows what that is. He knows those words. He used people to write the book, you know, to show us that, no matter what you've done or where you've been in your life, there's always forgiveness, and, and there's always something for you. And you just have to seek that and speak that back. Jesus went on the mountain and prayed. And when he did, he spoke the word back to God. And, we forget that. We forget to stand on the promises, and we forget to stand on, no weapon formed against me shall prosper, and we kind of forget those things. We might remember some Bible verses, or maybe we don't, maybe some people have a hard time, remembering them. But if we read them, even if we're reading them out loud and saying, hey, right here, it says, to stand on this, and I'm standing on faith. I don't have much, I might be like Peter and, forget to take my eyes off of you and not believe that, I can walk on water. I mean, of course, in today's day, we know we really can't walk on water, but, he didn't walk on water because, Jesus was standing there. He walked on water because he believed, and he had faith enough that he could walk on water to meet Jesus, and the moment he lost focus and he had doubt and we had fear, and he stopped focusing on Jesus, he started sinking. And we do that in our own lives, and we don't really think about it. We just, go on, and kind of like as an afterthought.
You write about breaking unhealthy cycles, generational curses, if you will. What's one cycle you were determined would end with you?
There's so many, a lot of people think, it'd be the easiest would be sexual abuse. And unfortunately, my kids and my grandkids have been impacted by those things, the very thing. And it didn't come from, inside of my household, like myself or my husband, it was outside, um, you know, and that was hard. That's a real hard pill to swallow. That's like the biggest one. And, like earlier you said, something like you had a hard time, wanting to forgive, and you just wanted the wrath of fire, God to bring down the fire, and there was moments like that, especially when it, not just my kids, but when it followed down, and when it hit my grandkids, and, you know, and it was by their biological mother. My son, has custody of them, which is great, but they face their own challenges, and that's hard. And I had moments that I'm not proud of this to say, but I had moments of okay, if I do, certain things, and I make her go away somehow, then she can't never hurt the kids, And there were really some deep, dark mindsets, And as much as I wanted revenge, and I wanted to do something to further protect them. I knew that that wasn't, that wouldn't have done anything. It would have just further caused, not only pain in my own life and problems, like big problems, but it would have been something my family that I had to carry too. And even though, some people may have understood the why, it's not the right thing. It's not what Jesus would like for us to do. And so for me, it took a long time to kind of like get to that whole, forgiveness. I don't have to have relationships with people that I forgive. You don't have to be best friends with them, and they don't have to come in your house and eat dinner and, smile and like act like everything's okay. Because it's not. But to carry it, you're doing more damage for you and, um, than you are, by harboring it and just, thinking that you can control the situation or you're going to do something to fix the situation. And, for me, um, that created like controlling issues in my own life. And, like when you get to a point where you don't control things, we think we're in control and we're not. God's in ultimate control and it's in his own timing. But sometimes we leave it and we give it to him, and then we get anger, we get jealous, or whatever. These emotions start flooding back in, and we start thinking about these thoughts. And the thing about thoughts are, it says, like take God says, take my thought captive, and I there for a while I didn't really, I knew what captive meant, but I didn't really understand it. And it's like when a thought comes in and it's not a good thought, or it's not a healthy thought, and we think about it, and sometimes we might not even say anything, but if we carry that thought too long, that opens the door for the enemy to come in and to create more havoc. And it's not just that thought, it creates other things, and then we have more problems in other areas of our life, and then we're just like, what's going on? And it started with a thought, and a lot of times it starts with um speaking the thought. Scripture says life and death is in the power of the tongue, and we don't really sometimes think about that when we're mad. We just sometimes we blurt it out. And the worst thing is when you blurt things out, you can't take them back. The words they're out there, and they can hurt somebody else, or they can do more damage for somebody else, but they also hurt you by just saying them. And I've had to like learn a lot of things, and there's a lot of different things that in my book that I talk about. So it's just not like one area that I that I think was like the biggest. It's a lot of things put together in a lot of different areas, and I didn't know how to really like what to do with them. And because I buried them so long and I kept them hidden, a lot of those surfaced, and a lot of those came out in relationships. Um, I've had abusive relationships early on because I thought I was damaged. Nobody wanted me. I was too broken. I was too far gone. Who would want somebody like me? And I mean, one day the light bulb went off, and like, what am I doing? And I didn't even know my birth mom at that time, but I was like, all I knew was from early on. I mean, I remember like, it was yesterday. I used to sit in front of the mirror as a child and say, please don't look like her. Please don't let me look like her. Please don't let me be like her. And I got to a point where, not that I did the abusing part of it, but I found myself in abusive relationships, very toxic relationships, things that were not healthy early on. but I had like the mindset that this is all I'm good enough for. I wasn't raised like that. But you're so deeply hurt. Um, and you start to put the shame on you that you know, that you don't even realize that that's what you're doing, that you're carrying that, and you're kind of becoming those patterns and those thoughts. So for me, it was like I had to focus at all areas, not just the big, not just the big pieces and the big parts, but even the smallest ones, the ones you don't really think about most, or the ones that have just become such a part of you that you've become complacent and you don't even see that they're an issue. And you have to look at every area, because if you only fix one area, yeah, sure, you can tape your life, tape the pieces back together, glue them back together, form them however. But if you keep like one piece or two pieces and you don't really fix all of it, you're going to still have a crack, and the mosaic piece is not going to be able to be completed, because it's always going to have a broken part, in order to completely turn it into a beautiful piece. You can't have one broken piece within that mosaic. And that's just kind of how I looked at it.
Absolutely. And there is a correlation with your book, Grit to Grace. You rebuilt homes through your renovation business. Do you see any connection between restoring a house and restoring a life?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Then, and this is where my passion is, right? So, I've done investment properties and I've restored homes, historical homes. I've also went into homeowners homes as well. But we're really where the term grit to grace came in at was, you know, I've always had grit my entire life, no matter what, no matter the situation, no matter how far down I was always determined to come back up, you know, and to have something better than the situation, that I was currently in. And um, by doing these homes, I stepped out, and I stepped out big, in a really big way. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know if I really had like the creativity or the understanding or the know-how to do any of this, right? And when you're doing a full home, you're taking it down to its bare bones. You're not just going in and painting and taking out some kitchen cabinets and putting some new ones in from Lowe's, Home Depot, wherever. Um, you're really taking it down all the way to, you know, where it started, and you're taking all the brokenness out, and you're restoring it. Um, I was able to mentor and talk to lots of people through um, these properties. I would be there, and people of all types of walks of life would just show up at the property, and they would just start talking to me. And, um, and it was, women, men, um, and it was in a very poverty stricken area. And I restore furniture and I turn them into kitchens, and I build kitchens with them with all different types of furniture pieces. And I paint them, and I match them to the style of the home, and um, I let it just flow through the entire home in the bathrooms, as well. So when I was able to start speaking with people and having them come over and I say, hey, come and look what I'm going to show you how to restore a piece of furniture. And there's this one girl that her mom had passed away, and I didn't know at the time, but I had purchased her mom's house, and I was almost finished with it, and I met her, and boy, the weight really started getting thick then, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is her mom's home. What if I make a mistake? What if it's not like what her mom would like? What if it's not like what they thought it should be like? What if, you know, it's horrible? And I just ruined this for them, right? And there was a moment like that, and it was 10:30 at night, and I'm sitting there and I'm crying in the floor, and I'm like, oh wow, is this what it really looks like on TV? Do they, is this where they have epic failures, and they don't really show the behind the scenes of how they're going to fix this? And I'm going back and forth, running to Lowe's, and I know the people at Lowe's thought this girl is crazy, and I'm trying to fix this. And I had painted this island that used to be an old store hutch and cabinet with drawers and things of that sort. And I had made it into an island, and I take the hutch part, the top part, and I put it and hung it in the laundry room, and put a shelf on the bottom, so that the piece was still in the home and just wasn't tossed away. And I really took a lot of time in painting this and getting it right and critiquing it. And I'm just sitting there and going, God, what am I supposed to do? The tile's busy. This is busy. Everything's busy. And there's not a focal point. And I was like, okay, I'm in a really bad storm, not outside, but in this house, with this project. And I was like, what am I going to do? And I have, paint that one of the paints is called Stormy Seas. And I was like, okay, I'm not really in a stormy sea, but I am kind of in a really unbalanced situation, and it doesn't feel good right now. And I chose that color, and I painted the piece, and it really calmed everything down, and it came out really beautiful. And then when she came in, she's like, oh wow, and she really loved the tile. That the piece that I was about to rip off the wall was one of the things that she really loved the most. But I took her to another property, and we started painting furniture, and we started talking. And I said, you know why I restore furniture? She said, why? And I said, because a lot of people look at it like damaged, broken, it's beyond repair, and they just want to toss it away, and they throw it away, and they throw it in a landfill, or they burn it, or, whatever, or they store it somewhere, and it just goes there to die, and, doesn't have a life anymore. And I said, I breathe life back into pieces, but I don't do it just to restore the piece. It's like, I do it because that's kind of how our lives are. We go through moments, and we feel so broken, and we feel so down, or so alone, or beyond repair. And we don't know how to pick the pieces back up and move forward. And I said, so that's what I do with, the furniture pieces. I bring them back to life, and I bring them back to life. And what I found with that was I was able to use furniture pieces to help people restore their brokenness and their lives. And and it's just so beautiful, because you think about, like, I thought about it like, this is what I do. I just restore pieces because I love it. It's a passion of mine. But at the end of the day, I saw it was a bigger plan, a bigger thing beyond just repairing the furniture. I saw that it gave people hope. It gave people healing. And by showing her how to do this, and she was very nervous. She was like, what if I mess up? And I was like, we mess up all the time. And I was like, and we fix, our mess ups all the time. And I was like, girl, it's just paint, you know? It's not right. We just redo it, we just fix it until we get, until we get it the way we want it. And I mean, the piece came out far greater than I could even had imagined or even had thought of, and a lot of times I can, walk in homes, and I get the feeling of the home or the style, and I can see it in my head even before the finished product. And and people, you know, a lot of people don't see that. They only see the outward, or they only see, the parts that they're looking at, and they don't see beyond that, and they don't go deeper than that. And, for me, I'm like, wow, that's really sad, you know? And what I started to realize was, you know, not only the challenges that I had doing these homes, you know, and, putting them together, I realized, like, one, how many people are, just broken, and they don't have the resources, they don't have the support, they don't have that. Thank you. They have to just themselves sometimes, or the support system that they think is good for them, and it's not the best option. And, I look beyond that. I look beyond, the person that's standing in front of me. I look at, like, you know, what can I do to show them that they don't have to stay stuck. They don't have to stay there. They don't have to stay in the cycle. And, there's restoration. And I looked beyond that, and I realized that, wow, homeowners out here, they don't know who to call. They don't, a lot of them, watching, you know, DIY, and, a lot of YouTube videos, or, these home shows, and they're all great. I've watched HGTV for years, and, you know, I've learned a lot of mistakes by DIYing my own things. But what I found was, these homeowners just kind of pick whoever comes to them first, or, you know, whoever gives them the best price. And that's not always the best decision, because people aren't looking at, like, their home and their investment and the return on their investment. They look at it like, okay, this is what they want. We're just going to give them what they want. And the problem is the homeowner's stuck with whatever that choice is, whether it's a good choice or a bad choice. And they're not having anybody there to, like, look beyond that, And I look beyond, that as well. And that's how I created my company, Home Innovation and Design, was because I was like, wow, if I'm struggling in innovation, in a property, what are homeowners doing? You know, um, what are they getting out of it? And in that, um, God is good. I just want to say that. At first, it was, I didn't know, like, I was like, okay, I created this business. And I also created a nonprofit, to go in homes and to restore homes, called The Sycamore Tree. And it's to go in habitable homes and to fix up kitchens and bathrooms, that are beyond belief. I bought a property that was just inhabitable, and the man lived there, and there was no running water. The electric was barely working, and sure, there were resources right in front of him, across the street, 2 blocks over. People passing him down from the city. People knew of him, but they didn't never stop. They didn't help. And unfortunately, he passed away. Got ran over by a car, but and it painted a picture for me, and that's kind of how I built these businesses, and and the book, Grit to Grace, because a lot of people have, you know, they're always out here, and they're always, feeling like they're just climbing out of a hole, and they don't feel like they're ever going to get there, or they're in the valley and they never can see the top of the mountain, and they give up, and they just stay in the valley, and they just stay in the darkness, and they stay in the brokenness, and they don't get healing. And so out of that, I was like, man, these houses, they were brutal, and they came out really beautiful. Across my portfolio, the average is 120%. My highest is 130% return on investment. And the one that was the highest, ironically, was the one that I had the lowest budget on. And it was a $45,000 budget that the lender had gave me by an appraisal that wasn't exactly accurate. And I usually fight them, and I've done so and I've won. But this one I said, you know what? No, I just want to take $45,000 and I'm going to make a beautiful 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath home. I'm going to rebuild all the walls, the floors in the bathrooms, and I'm going to restore the home, and I'm going to finish the original hardwood floors and put a kitchen in, and cabinets and all these things. And of course, at the moment, I'm like, God, I don't know what I'm doing. But I want to show a community that it doesn't take much to bring life back into a home. And I did that with free cabinets. Looked on, we have a Facebook market. So I looked there and somebody was giving away free old pine cabinets. And I was like, great, they're wood. I don't buy cheap product. And, I buy everything that's solid wood. And there was a cabinet that was hanging on the wall. And I was like, oh, perfect. This will be my floating bathroom vanity. And somebody else gave me another one that was identical to another bathroom cabinet. It was a little bit bigger and it was perfect. And I was like, man, this is coming out beautiful. So far, I haven't spent a whole lot of money. And I got 130% return on investment on that property. And it was like, wow, so when I look at that, I look at like everything as a whole, not just as a partial, and not just through one lens, but the complete lens, because that's what people need, is somebody looking at all of it and not just a part of it, and just only choosing the part that they're comfortable being around or dealing with.
Indeed, indeed. For the person listening tonight who feels trapped by their past, ashamed of their story, or convinced they will never fully heal, what would you want them to know before they give up on themselves?
The one thing I really want a lot of people to know is this: society kind of puts a lot of things in your mind, and they make you want to believe one thing or another, and they want you to feel one way or another. And we have nowadays, it's really far worse than what I had when growing up. I mean, we were kind of just getting into the era of the internet, cell phones, things like that. But nowadays, people have everything. You Google something, and whatever comes across that screen, it could become a belief, and it might not be a good belief, and it could really do more damage than good. And then of course you get on social media, and I used to say it, when I first got on, I called it fake book,
Mhm.
and I'll tell you the reason why. Because anybody can be on a computer and tell how great their life is, and they can put a bunch of pictures up there, and they can hide behind it, or maybe their life is great, and that's good. But a lot of people put that out there, but the people that have pain, and they're carrying shame and their guilt, um, you know, it paints a different picture, and it puts things like, I'm never going to be good enough. Look at those people. Look at their lives. Look at them. I don't have that. I never had that. I don't think I'm going to ever have that. And it makes them not want to share anything that's going on in their lives. And the problem is this: society has silenced a lot of things that have went on. And people have a hard time talking about it. And sometimes they have opened up, and they've kind of been disregarded, pushed away. Oh, that didn't happen. Oh, too bad. Deal with it. Um, and the thing is I used to feel the same way. used to feel, oh God, the shame.
Yes, indeed,
You
indeed.
you get you feel this heaviness, right? Yours. It wasn't yours to begin with, you know? It was somebody else's that they chose and that they did. And then they put it upon you. And then you're left to carry it. And you're not told how to deal with it, you know? I thought at one point, a lot of people said I missed my purpose, right? And they said, "Oh, you should have been, you know, a lawyer. You should have been, a counselor or a psychiatrist." And sure, I went to college for a lot of different things. Architect, that didn't go well. And ironically, now, here I am, in homeowners and, doing design layouts and, you know, builds and additions and, decks and things of that sort, which, requires architectural mindset. And I took child psychology and, different psychology. And I've even taken, you know, different kind of courses for crisis intervention, both inside, prison walls and outside the prison. I worked as a sergeant, and there's a lot of brokenness in there, and there's a lot of people in there that, had they gotten help, they wouldn't be there. And how they get the real help inside the walls, they could thrive when they get out, or they could thrive while they're in there behind the walls. And the problem is people want to just kind of put everything into the same category. Okay, you've been abused this way, so these are all the things that you should do, and then you're going to be okay. But see, that's not how people work, and that's not how trauma works, and that's not how shame works, and that's not how the guilt or the pain works. It doesn't work that way. What works is when you're able to really truly be vulnerable and open up and share about it and know that it's nothing to be ashamed about, because the moment that you actually speak up and you start to share and start to say something, sure, it's awkward. You've been carrying it your whole life. You've been playing, um, you know, it in your head the whole time. How am I going to talk about this? How am I going to deal with this? What am I going to do? How are they going to think about me? What are they going to say? And you actually create conversations before they're had with people. And when somebody says something that you've already created in your mind, it shuts you down and you stop and you think, well, God, I spoke up. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? Now what? These people over here said, this, or these people over here disregarded me, you know? So, you know, why are you wanting me to talk about it? Why do I feel like I'm supposed to talk about it? Let me just cover back up, as long as I'm hidden, you know, people won't see that part of me. And the problem is that's not the best part of you. The best part of you is the part that God designed you to be. And the best part is when you start to talk about it, and you start to really see like what it is, and that it didn't just happen to you and only you, and that there's so many people that are out there that have dealt with the same, similar experiences. Um, you know, it doesn't matter what you went through, it doesn't matter what got you there to feel that way. What matters is that you're bold enough to stand up to say, "Hey, I've had enough. I'm done. This isn't mine to carry. I don't have to carry this anymore. And I want to help other people. I don't want to only help myself, but I want to help others." And for me, I wrote it in my book. If I can only reach one, then I've reached someone. I've done something more than if I'd have just sat back and just said, "I'm shameful. It's too embarrassing. It's too hard." And I could have made a million and one excuses, sure. And that would have been easy. And sometimes, a lot of people say, You know, we complicate our lives, we make them hard, and we just need to do easy. My whole life has never been easy. It's always been grit, true grit. And true grit is when you peel yourself back up and you say, get up, go, do. Don't sit, don't wait, go. And grace is in those moments where you feel alone, and you feel that heaviness, and you feel that shame, and you feel the pain. God knows those things. He sees those things. He doesn't want you staying there. He doesn't want you in that moment anymore. He's built you and designed you to go past that and to break that and to do something with your life that's far greater than you can even imagine. But when we stay there, we're stuck. And when we get stuck, we create our own cycles and we keep looping and we keep being in the same type of situation over and over and over and over again. And we're like, are we ever going to get out of it? You know, you might get it out of one, but then you find yourself back into a different situation, a different circumstance, similar situation. And what happens is we stay stuck and we don't get up and we don't go and we don't do. And I'll tell you, writing this book has been the biggest blessing that's far greater than I can even imagine. And, you know, it doesn't matter if I'm a bestseller. It doesn't matter if I make money off of it or if I don't. What matters is if I can get it into the hands of everyone. So you don't have to be in trauma. You don't have to be abused. You don't have to be any of those. You just have to have an understanding of, you know, what to do with it when you do meet somebody that has been through something and how to help them and how to truly help them, you know? And we're in a society these days that everybody's busy. They're too busy. They're too busy to go have coffee. They're too busy to go have lunch. They're too busy to hang out with family. They're too busy. I know. I've been those things. And sometimes I find myself in that, even today, you know? And I've had to take a step back and say, I got to stop. And I just got to take a moment to spend time with somebody, you know? Because you get missed conversations. You get missed moments. And I've had moments where, just recently I put some stuff up for a yard sale. And, first it was just my nonprofit stuff. And I said, okay, let's see how this goes. Then, it got bigger and bigger. And I had my books out there. And every opportunity I had, I got to speak with someone. Well, one Sunday after church, I was tired. My husband was outside working, and I thought, great, he's busy. I can come in and I can take me a little nap and and rejuvenate, and nobody will bother me, and, it'll be great. And no sooner did I lay my head down on the pillow, I hear the front door open. I'm like, oh no, great. He's in the house. Now he probably wants to do something. And I'm tired. And he says, hey, there's a girl out here and she wants to know a price on something. And she needs her cash app because she doesn't have cash. And at first I was like, well, here it is. Rustic Farm 24, and I said, he's probably going to mess it up, he's probably going to get it wrong. I was like, let me just go out there and talk to her. Let me tell you something. It was a 5 to 10 minute conversation, if that, right? And in that, I don't know what compelled me. I just said, oh yeah, hey, by the way, I wrote a book called Grit to Grace. She said, what is it about? I told her. And she opened up and she shared her story with me, about how it happened to her with a family member. And, and all the things that she's had to go through. And she's not the first person that I've met. And I gave her a book and I signed it and I said, here, it's yours. I said, You owe me nothing. Just read it. And there's a second one that showed up, and same thing. We're talking, I don't know these people. And she asked me about my book and how much, and she said, "Oh, I don't have the money." And I even reduced it 50%. And she said, "I'll have to come back." She was getting in her car. I was like, "What am I doing? It's the books are $13 online. I'm selling them here $10. I'm trying to sell it to her, $5, $6, And I'm like, "Get the book, give it to her." And she's about to pull away, and I said, "Hey, excuse me." She rolls her window down, and I said, "Hey, I just want you to have this book." And the smile on her face was good enough for me, because I knew if she went home and she read it, and she could apply it, and she could find grace and forgiveness, not only for, forgiving somebody else, but forgiving yourself for carrying that. We forget that. We carry things that aren't ours, and we forget to ask forgiveness for ourselves, And sometimes, it's easier to say, "Hey, yeah, forgive, but I'm never going to forget," right? But we say it with such sarcasm. "Oh yeah, I'm going to forgive that, but I'm not going to forget it." And it's not meant for us to completely forget, but it's not for us to carry and to not shine our light and not to show others that we're beautiful no matter what's happened to us, no matter where we've been in life, no matter the what. And we'll never, maybe sometimes we don't understand the why, But, I'm going to say about 85 to 90% of abusers, they were abused themselves. I've seen it. I've heard it. And it's sad. Then the cycle was never broken. It just continued. So why do we continue to carry the weight and the shame and not speak up? So that not only are we healing ourselves from the abuse of what's been done to us, but can you imagine if we help the abusers? Because here's the truth. There's no gray area when you're abused. You either become one or the other. You're an abuser or you're an advocator. And you go out and you try to help people. And you try to do, and you might not speak about what happened to you, while you're doing these things. But you have an empath. You're an empath. You have empathy for others. You want to help those that you see brokenness in them. And you often get hurt more times than you can count. And then you're stuck in it again. The pain, the shame, the hurt, the guilt, And then everybody telling you, "Look, see what happened to you again? You got family, friends, and they're all looking at you like you're crazy, but you know that you're doing it because you're hurt. And you don't know what else to do but to help others." But the problem is we all want to go, "Well, the abuser should just die in prison. They should just do what's done, what they did to somebody else, they should just do it to them." Yeah, I'm speaking it because I was that person that said that. And I said, "Man, I hope he gets what he deserves." And I was assured that, oh yeah, that's going to happen to him. Man, not only did I just add more to my problems, but I added that to it too. I added more weight. And I was wrong. And, I'm lucky to even have an opportunity to be able to have found him, much less to write him, much less to say, "Hey, I forgive you," and really truly mean it. Not just say it because I want to just move on. I said it from my heart. I meant it. I was tired. I didn't want to carry it no more. I wanted closure. I wanted to know who I was, And, we forget that God tells us all the time who we are to him. We're his child. We're his, his joy. Even in the brokenness, he still loves us. Even in our sins, he still loves us. But he doesn't want us to stay stuck there. He doesn't want us to lose our souls and who he's designed us to be, because we just have the mindset of ourselves, others, the seeds we've planted, the enemy coming in and just using it because he knows he can. He knows what we've done with it in the past. So he knows what we're going to react in the present. He doesn't know what God has planned for us in the future, but he knows us because he watches us just like God watches us. But if we sit there and we don't do anything with it, we're not helping anybody. We're not helping ourselves. We're definitely not helping other people. And there's so many people that I'm finding now, like sharing my story, that I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. Didn't have all the rejections and the issues with, growing up and, not knowing who my biological parents were. And growing up in school like that, you think, well, you have parents, you have a mom and you have a dad, right? Or maybe you don't, right? And that's hard for a kid. It's hard for a kid to go to school. And it's hard for a kid to find good relationships because they don't know how to have one. They don't know how to have a relationship. And, that's been kind of, a heavy burden on me that, not by dealing with it early on, and not that I knew that I hadn't, it got passed on. And, my kids had hard challenges with, relationships. And, that's not easy to admit, because society's big on, pointing the fingers at your kids. I mean, excuse me, at the parents. It's the parents' fault that the kids are out here doing these things. You know what the problem is? Societies forgot how to be a society. They forgot about how being a community and how helping others, not just people that live next door to you, but people in general. And we've lost that. We've lost that so far ago. I don't even know when. But if you just look around you, you see the communities are just lost. They're broken. And they're broken because nobody's reaching out. Nobody's doing anything about it. Nobody's lifting other people up. They're just all about themselves. And, and that's where people are left. They're left with the brokenness and they're left with the pieces. And they're looking outwards, and we should be looking upward first. Then we should be looking outward. But we always look outward and we can't find. We stay hidden. We don't step out. And we can't help somebody, And I think that's really sad in our society that we've gotten to that. We've created busy lives. We've created, areas in our lives that we're lost. We're lost in our own ways, our own whatever's going on with us, to be bothered about somebody else's problem, or we're just lost in our own problem, that we forget that the solution is right in front of your face. Is to look up and then look outward. Ask God, how can I help somebody like me? What can I do? And sometimes it's just sharing your story and telling somebody else, hey, I know it's hard. You don't have to tell the whole story. Just a piece or two of your life. It's just enough, And the test that we go through, it can be the biggest testimony for somebody. But if we just sit back and we just, oh, poor me. Yeah, I was that person. Pity me. Poor me. Why me? And when you're there, you'll stay there. And then when life really starts hitting you as you get older and you start looking back and you're just like, man, why has it been so heavy? Well, because we never let go of the baggage that we weren't supposed to carry to begin with. And we just kind of added and added and added. And the more we added, the heavier things got. And the more when problems come, the harder it is to navigate, the harder it is to make decisions. I know. I've made some really bad mistakes. And it's cost me financially, emotionally, spiritually, in my marriage, with my kids, with my friendships, with people in general. And now I look at things a little differently. I just want to speak truth. I just want to speak, hope. I just want to speak like, don't give up. Don't throw the towel in. Don't quit. Because not only maybe you can help yourself, but you can help somebody else. There's so many people that are in this and they become so suicidal and they don't get help. They keep it to themselves and their own family doesn't even know. But that's not the answer. Because then, if you really think about it, that's selfish. You're only thinking about yourself in the moment. You don't think about your parents. You don't think about your friends. You don't think about your family. You don't think about your coworkers. You don't think about the people that you had an impact on that you maybe not even know that you had an impact in their lives. And it's a ripple effect. And the damage is far greater, I promise you, than what you feel like you're dealing with or what you're carrying. And salvation is lost. It's gone if you choose that path. And there's so many people out here that are willing to help you. And sure, I've been through my therapies and I know firsthand my first one was the hardest. My parents take me, they don't know what to do. They know they need to tell me, but they don't know how. And it's not their fault. They just didn't know how. Unfortunately, they found a therapist. Unfortunately, it was a man. Unfortunately, he told them to get up simultaneously and leave them and go to the restroom. And the very first words he said to me, "You're sexually abused."
Wow.
And I sat there in utter shock. I didn't even know what to say. I didn't say anything. And I was angry. And I didn't tell my dad because I was embarrassed and I was ashamed. And I felt guilt. Like, man, here's my parents. They're trying to give me help. They don't know how. They take me. They think they're doing right. But at the end of the day, it was damage. And when I told my dad, he was mad. He wished he would have known then. But I didn't want to put that on him to go and have anger and say words to somebody. Maybe they should have been said to him. But sometimes the best answer is not always saying something. Sometimes it is being silent. But you have to know when to be silent and when to speak up. And this is a time to speak up. This isn't a time to be silent. You have therapists that don't know how to tell you to heal. They think they know. They went to school. They took all these classes. Sure, there's some things that can be used and some tools that can help, some coping mechanisms. But if you don't want to write in a book and you don't want to write your thoughts out, It's not going to work for you. You're not going to do it. You're not going to journal. You know, you have to find what brings you joy. You know, what helps you to cope with what you've dealt with. And you have to find the right person to speak to. And sometimes, I mean, there's a book out here. It says you're gonna have 100 no's before you get to one yes. Right? You know? I mean, come on. Christ said, you know, the shot you miss is the one you never took. You could have tried it 100 times and missed. But the last shot, you gave up too early. You quit. You said, what's the point? And you missed. You missed the opportunity. You missed the moment. You know, there's lots of opportunities in my life I look back and I've missed. Simply because I thought the same way. I felt the same way. And I hear people all the time going, when I share my book, oh, people like that, they should just be dead. They talk bad about them. Oh, that's the only person I can't never forgive. I can't forgive those type of people. I don't understand. I'm gonna share something. Working in the prison, I saw this. And I saw this in women. And I saw this throughout. And it's sad. But this one particular girl, and it's an end shift, and she's on 15-minute watch. I mean, she doesn't have anything. She can't hurt herself. And I'm tired. I want to go home. It's been a long day. And, you know, I'm back in segregation. You know, these girls are locked down mainly, you know, about 24 hours a day. That takes a mental toll on somebody. You know, and at the end of the day, she starts acting out, and I'm like, Lord, not today. I just want to go home, tired. And it's like, well, I can't go home. So I spend the next 3 hours working with this girl. And at the first, 20 minutes, they're like, let's just go in and handcuff her. Oh, she's in a fetal position, rocking back and forth. And she's, don't touch me, don't touch me, don't touch me. And I'm telling everybody out. And I shut the door. And I look at them and I said, she's sexually abused. Don't ask me how I know. Just know I know. She's been sexually abused as a child. We have to talk to her differently. I said, you're going to see her as an adult, but she's clearly in a child mentality. She's living the moment of where she was. And we have to talk to her like that. And the psychiatrist came over and he said, you want to go to the emergency room? I said, you can't talk to her like that. She doesn't know what emergency room is. She knows hospital. She knows doctor. She knows, do you want to get better? Do you want to go in a car ride? She's going to understand simple terms. And when I start speaking to her and building trust in her, because she saw us as the people that hurt her. And it took 3 hours. I was able to get her out of her cell. She dressed herself. She sat herself in a wheelchair. Then we cuffed her. Then we took her out. And it was challenging, sure. There was moments that I thought, we're never going to get her to the car. And I just kept speaking to her. And whatever she felt like she wanted to talk about, we talked about. And when she got frustrated, I changed the subject. And I got her mind off of things. But let me tell you, the biggest testimony is this. 3 weeks later, I didn't know what happened to her. Nobody said anything to me. And I said, God, I don't know how to help these girls. You brought me here. I remember the day that I applied thinking, this is crazy. I don't want to work here. This isn't what I want to do. I don't want to be here. I even laughed and I said, God, you really brought me to the devil's playground? Not knowing that, I was going to actually work and become a sergeant. Not knowing that, I probably helped a lot of those women in there, not even knowing. But the biggest moment was I was outside one day and I was just like, God, what do you got me here for? I can't help. I don't know how to help these women in here. They're all broken. Some of them never had parents. Some of them didn't have guidance. Some of them didn't have good upbringings. Some of them have been so tortured and abused. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to act. And they're here. And I can't speak to them in a way that I want to speak to them because I'm not allowed. And I said, but God, you can. And I need you to speak to them. I don't have anything else. And I remember standing on the sidewalk, nobody around me. And I prayed that. And I asked that out loud. And I walked in. And as I'm going in the building, here's this girl. And I'm like, wow. And it's just us. And we're locked in between two doors. And the officers inside the building. And I'll never forget these words as long as I live. She looked at me and she said, thank you for praying for me. I was abused by a man. Wow. About 15, 20 minutes before that, I just prayed asking God to speak to these women. I never in a million years thought that he would show me that same day within a 20-minute time period or so that he spoke. And he spoke through that girl. And the words that came out were so profound. I didn't have words. I said nothing. And if you think, that's one of many. So if we just sit here and we stay in our own boxes, in our own minds, and our own thinking, and in our own ways, and our own brokenness, we miss out on our purpose. And we can't reach those because we don't speak up. We don't share. And maybe sometimes we don't even pray and ask. And I learned it's not hard. Yeah, life is hard. Sure. I felt it, my whole life. I've even said, why does somebody else, no matter what I've done in my life, no matter where I've worked, I said, why is it somebody else that's doing the exact same job? Doesn't matter if it's a man or a female. It's easy for them. Does the exact same thing that I do, the exact same way that I do it. And yet, it's easy for them. And mine is grit. I have to work 10 times harder to get the same results as somebody else that doesn't work 10 times harder. And it looks like it just drops in their lap. And I used to be like, I don't understand, God. Wasn't it enough for me to go through that? But I stay broken. I'm always broken. Why do you keep me here? And I was like, why didn't you just let me die? And Yeah, when you're there, that's how you really feel. And it's okay to sometimes feel that way. But what's not okay, it's not okay to stay there. It's not okay to think that. It's not okay to carry that. It is okay to sit with that emotion for a minute and try to understand it and ask God, what is it that I'm supposed to do with it? Why am I carrying it? You know? And He's going to take you through that season. But just know that even when it feels like He's not there and He's not speaking to you, whether it's through music or whether it's through a person or whether it's through reading the Word, whether it's through prayer or however it comes, it says, I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. And we forget that sometimes, especially when we think, He's not there. He's not listening. Look at my life. People think He's not here. You know how many people's told me that if it's hard, it's not from God? I just want you to sit with that for a minute. Because Scripture says, and Jesus said it, I didn't come to make your life easy, and I might not be saying it per word. He said, you will have strife because of who I am, and you will have problems. And I didn't come for together. Well, it's not togetherness, but he didn't come for like peaceful. He came to create division. And you know, at first I didn't know what that meant. Why would God want to put a division? A division in what? Why does He want to divide us? Why does He want to separate us? You know, why does He give us such a hard life? But He said it, your life's not going to be easy. And if you know what the life of Mary was like, I mean, wow. Our lives sometimes are less minimal compared to what she went through. I mean, imagine here's a woman that's getting ready to be married, hasn't married yet, and she's pregnant. I mean, think about that. Think about what that must be like. There's a belief that if you're not married and you have a child, then you must have created the biggest sin before God. And sure, can you imagine Joseph? His friends? His family? Telling him what he must do? And sure, for a moment, think about that, a moment, not a lifetime, a moment. He left. But God spoke. And He came back. And Mary had to travel and continue to travel because people wanted to do bad things because they didn't believe. But God had already told them, and they didn't listen, that Jesus was coming and that the Messiah would be born. And He was. Not in no hospital bed, not even in their own home. in straw in a stable. I mean, we all know what a horse stable smells like, or a barn stable smells like. It's not clean. It's dirty. And here's the Son of God being born in the most harsh conditions. Did that stop him? Did that stop Mary? Did that stop Joseph? And it sure didn't stop God. And he carried what his purpose was. Ridiculed, blasphemed, betrayed, attacked, like all these things. I mean, Satan even used it. I'm going to get him. He's man now. He's in flesh. This is going to be easy. I deceived Eve with an apple because she didn't have full understanding. And she was told this. Sure, she believed it.
Indeed. Jocelyn, where can our listeners purchase your book and connect with you on the internet?
So you can go to Amazon and purchase it, or you can go to jocelyntoppin.com, and if you purchase it there, it's $1 less. So I believe it's $12.99 on Amazon, and it's $11.99 directly on my website.
All right. Listeners, just in case you need those links, and I know you will, I will have them in the description of this episode and in the show notes. So all you guys have to do is just click the links. The central theme of this episode isn't trauma, it's transformation. And the takeaway should be your past may explain you, but it does not have to define you. The broken pieces of your story can become the very foundation of your purpose. Tonight, Jocelyn reminded us of a powerful truth. The broken pieces of our lives doesn't have to be hidden. They can become part of something beautiful. Her story isn't just about surviving trauma. It's about choosing healing, choosing faith, choosing to believe that your past may explain your journey, but it doesn't have to, or it doesn't get to define your future. If you've ever wondered whether it's possible to rebuild after pain, let her conversation be your reminder that healing is possible. Hope is definitely real. God is definitely real, and grace still has the final word. Be sure to connect with Jocelyn Toppin and check out Grit to Grace, my Mosaic Life. Until next time, don't lose sight. I'm Coach Dini, and you've been listening to Vigilantes Radio Live, the frequency of the fearless. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. It was an honor to hear your story and your
Thank you
insights.
for having me on your show. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we wish you well and much support, and thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.